Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And welcome to another edition of SMNTY Fiction, which is a once-a-month thing we do. It's lightly edited on my end. Christina puts amazing sound effects in there, so huge shout out to her. We love doing these. Mm-hmm. And if you have any suggestion for something else we can do in this realm, that's in the public domain, it won't get us in trouble. Please let us.
That's fine. We can't afford it.
We can't afford it. But that would be fun, especially because we're moving into Halloween time. But that being said, this is the final chapter of Terminus. This is part 2 of Terminus, which is also called Big Things Start Small. And this is the chapter you get where the title came from.
You
By the way,
it till the end. I like it.
My ex-boyfriend used to hate that. He was like, that's how you can tell a piece of media is bad if they say the title in it. And I was like, wow. The title is in here.
This dude had a lot of opinions, didn't he?
He did. He really did.
He was very unhappy. All right, keep going.
Yes. But yeah, so this is the final chapter. We are splitting it in two because, again, I'm terrible at chapter length. And I'm really, really excited. I'm really, really excited because the ending is a cliffhanger. And I'm just happy because I'm a monster, I guess, and I like torturing people. But we'll move into part 3 soon after. And part 3 is much shorter. And then we'll get to the end of the Terminus saga. This is something I wrote for National Novel Writing Month. I believe in 2011, but I have got to tell you, Samantha, I know I say this in every one. I swear to God, I wrote this before I played The Last of Us. But there is literally a place called like Firefly Winery in here. Oh. It's wild to me. Like, what was going on?
Firefly. Oh, yeah.
What was going on in my brain?
Which I mistaken to be like a mixed drink. The Firefly vodka, but it's just straight vodka, and I just gave it to a friend of the show, Katie. Yes. Straight. She took it like a champ, and then she was like, "Do you mind if I get a mixer?"
Yes, this is when we were doing our Last of Us watch parties, and we were doing themed drinks, and
the Firefly vodka, which we brought.
Yeah. Yes.
In celebration.
If somehow don't know or don't remember, Firefly is it's like the Resistance in The Last of Us. So I was reading this like, what?
Predictions. She just knew.
Predictions. Or maybe I'm just way off about the date. That is entirely possible. But I could have sworn I wrote the first one in 2010 and I wrote the next one the next year.
Oh no, someone's going to come and like debunk this and said that she was lying.
Please don't. This is like my worst fear. And I'm so embarrassed by it that I'll say something minorly wrong and someone will be like, we can't trust anything she says. Anyway.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, the game came out in 2013. I don't know. Okay, whatever.
Anyway, it's okay.
So content warning for disease, aftermath of violence, end of the world stuff, internalized shame, and discussions of infertility. Here is a brief summary. There is a disease called HSV-5 that has decimated the human population, has made having children incredibly difficult. The state, which is essentially the government institution, alongside the religious organization ARM, took control of every part of reproduction. Our protagonist, Tilda, escaped with her illegally conceived child, Madison. They've been on the run from enforcers of the government for 7 years. She encounters a resistance who claims that there is a vaccine, only to be betrayed by them, and learns that there is a vaccine, but ARM has destroyed all but 2 samples of it. Tilda ventures with Madison into the heart of DC and learns that the leaders of ARM are Madison's grandparents. In a violent confrontation, Madison receives the last vaccine, and Tilda broadcasts out over the national system what ARM and the state has done. They then flee and have been on the run since then, not knowing who to trust. They have braved harsh weather, heard a broadcast from the leader of the resistance trying to convince them to come back to DC, and survived a brutal attack. After a tense conversation and some recovery, they are setting out once again. So that is where we are. Let us get into it. Both she and Madison rose early. Tilda felt like a set of badly screwed together bones in a much abused suit of skin. They followed their regular morning routine. Pop-Tarts this day, strawberry flavored and bottles of water. Tilda found a pan and poured some water for Scout, who drank it thirstily. The Pop-Tart stuck painfully in Tilda's throat. She fought valiantly to keep her pain from showing on her face. Without much said between them, they packed up, collected the flashlight from the table, zipped jackets and tied boots, adjusted hats and gloves, and exited the farmhouse, Madison leading Scout by the reins. Tilda passed a mirror, her step faltering at the sight of her face, her throat decorated with hues of reds, purples, blues, blacks, her eyes bloodshot, her face puffy and red, angry red welts and specks of red cuts, purple bruises ringing her neck, and red scratches from fingernails. A cocktail of anger and shame flared up within her, and she looked away, unable to face the ugly, damaged creature wearing her face. The air outside was brisk and chilly, but not the brutal cold they'd become accustomed to over the past few weeks. She shut the door behind them, and they stepped down the stairs where they both mounted Scout, Tilda struggling more than usual with the soreness of her joints. The sun was still middling near the horizon, so early was their start. As they passed through the rows of papery, dried-out corn husks, they took the right on Seneca Hollow Road, heading southwest. A few rusted skeletons of cars were abandoned on the side, one of them with little sprouts growing out the hubcaps. Not too long after they'd left the farmhouse behind, they crossed over a small river on a rickety wooden bridge that Tilda was afraid would collapse underneath them. Though it creaked and wriggled with each of Scout's steps, the wood held. Tilda released the breath she'd been holding when they reached the solid ground on the other side. She was just as relieved that Scout kept up the quicker pace Tilda had been pushing her to maintain. The road veered sharply left and Tilda followed it, her eyes darting from side to side, the pain pulsing through her body making it difficult to focus. She needed something else to anchor her. "What were you dreaming about last night, Mouse?" She felt him tense. "Did I wake you up?" was his response a moment later. Recognizing the diversionary tactic, Tilda responded with, "I was already awake. I had a bad dream myself." "What did you dream about?" Tilda chuckled humorlessly. "I asked you first." Another pause. "I don't remember." "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I think it might help." Tilda knew talking about these things wasn't easy for either of them, but she didn't want Madison to suffer in silence if she could do something to help. Madison waited for another long minute, his shoulders tense. "I dreamt I couldn't find you," he relented quietly. "I didn't know where you were. I was all alone." Tilda didn't press, even though she could tell there was more. She was sure that was what it boiled down to. Most of her nightmares, reduced to the bare bones of the fear that they played on, were essentially that as well. "I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here. I think I'd die," he admitted quietly. Tilda's heart clenched. "You're stronger than you think," she told him just as quietly. He shook his head, but she spoke over him before he could say anything. "Yes, you are. You're stronger than you know." He didn't respond, but it was obvious he didn't believe her. "What'd you dream about?" he asked. "The same kind of thing." Tilda tugged on the reins, pushing Scout to speed up. "I dreamt I'd lost you, and I didn't know where I was. All I knew was that I had to find you again." "Did you find me?" Madison asked. "No," she thought to herself. "She never did." "It was just a dream," she intoned, scanning the tree lines. Ahead, she could make out what looked like a major highway intersecting the one they were following. "But if I ever lost you, Mouse, I'd never stop looking for you. I would never stop until I found you. You know that, right? Madison sniffled. I know. You won't be alone. Not as long as I'm alive. She couldn't be sure why these words were tumbling from her lips, but she felt it was important for him to know. Okay, Madison said in a watery voice. You believe me? She pressed. Yes. Madison's whisper was almost lost. You'd find me. That was different than she never stopped looking, but she wanted to believe that too. That no matter how lost Madison was to her, no matter how lost she was to herself, she'd find him again. She'd never stop looking. She wouldn't know how. Signs began to pop up for Interstate 81. The closer they came to it, the more nervous Tilda grew. 636, road they were on, ramped over it, the interstate passing under. Scout gambled up the cracked slope, and the tree line broke. They were out in the open. Tilda hunched in on herself, glancing down the length of the highway from their vantage point above it. A jungle of abandoned trucks, RVs, sedans, SUVs, a maze crammed into each other at different angles, stretching as far as her eyes could make out. In the distance to the north, she could make out pinpoints of figures, people making the journey to D.C. Tilda hoped they were too focused on the hardship ahead of them to look behind them and see the woman and child crossing on horseback. A chunk of the bridge had crumbled away on one side, slabs of asphalt of varying sizes hanging from cables and bent metal rods, dangling like vines. Tilda gave the gap a wide berth, afraid it'd collapse if they put too much weight near it. The highway sloped down and back to solid ground, once again ensconcing them in pine trees. Tilda relaxed the tiniest bit, glancing over her shoulder, suddenly afraid she'd see the corpses of Ellis and Jake mindlessly shambling after them. It was a brighter day than it had been in a long time, the sun in sharp contrast to the crisp blue sky. 636 curved to run parallel with the interstate, but a clump of trees shielded them from view, giving them a small measure of security. 636 forked, branching off into 821. Tilda slowed Scout, but quickly decided to skew right, and thus more westerly, on 821, in order to put more distance between them and the highway. And the bodies they'd left behind in Lafayette, along with a camp of people surely looking for them. 821 was an even smaller highway than 636, all the back roads connecting to it containing Hollow in the name. Ginger Hollow, Dark Hollow, Apple Hollow. A stream ran on either side of them, gurgling water. When they reached another fork, Tilda coaxed Scout into a convenience store parking lot, avoiding a string of streetlights hanging from a post. She and Madison dismounted. A quick perusal of the convenience store returned nothing useful. Scout meandered over the short distance to the stream for water. Tilda kept an eye on her, but doubted Scout would run from them now. Can I feed her? Madison asked as Tilda pulled out 2 granola bars and 2 small bottles. Yes, after we eat. Madison nodded his consent, munching on his granola bar. Tilda took a bite, then immediately regretted it as it grated down her throat. Madison watched her like a hawk, so she forced the rest of the unappetizing, dust-tasting bar down, chasing every bite with water. Scout had wandered back and was watching them alternately. Madison popped up and gathered a handful of the pellets from her pouch and fed them to her. She ate them hungrily, and Tilda knew a flash of guilt. She'd been pushing Scout harder and harder, but there was not much to feed her with, or in the way of water either. But she'd just have to make do, like the rest of them. They packed back up and set off again, following 821 at the fork. A roaring sound grew gradually louder. A river ran along the road, white-capped with melted ice. They traveled against its current for a couple of miles before they crossed over it, the white noise loud in their ears. The road continued north for another mile and then turned sharply south, dead-ending into 603, which followed closely along the river in the opposite direction they'd just traveled. This time, Tilda didn't even hear the click or the static. Just all of a sudden, her mother's voice, quiet and close. At first, she thought she was hallucinating, but Madison jolted as if electrified, telling her he'd heard it too.
Tilda, my child, it's your mother.
She implored wetly. She was near tears, her words textured with emotion.
Again, but this time under very different circumstances.
A pause in the transmission. Tilda looked around wildly, causing Scout to stamp in a semicircle, confused.
You understood the code I gave you in my last transmission. You must have.
Another laugh. A lump lodged in Tilda's throat.
I reminded you where you came from. I told you to fight, and you did. You were stronger than I ever could have imagined.
Tilda's vision was blurry with tears. She corrected course, determined. Madison tried to spin and look at her, but couldn't on Scout's back.
You don't have to fight anymore, baby. You've done your part. We're working on manufacturing a vaccine. I'm mass producing it from the one we recovered from the vaulted arm headquarters. Members of ARM are in custody, as are leaders of the state. We have formed a transient government with members of the resistance and other civilians. We hope to hold elections soon. More and more people flood in every day. More than I thought were still alive. Children, too. It's been so long since I've seen one.
Tilda wondered if her hair was graying and her face wrinkled. The image she pulled up of her mother was blurry, fuzzy edges. She could barely remember.
I want to meet Madison, my grandson. I want to see my daughter again. I want you to know
Her voice broke.
how proud your father and I am of you, and how much we love you. But I know that the last time I sent a message like this to you, it was a trap. I know you've been betrayed and hunted and almost killed right here. And in DC, your child was almost taken from you. Trust me, I know what that's like.
Tilda remembered suddenly herself screaming for her mother as the enforcers led her from her childhood home, the look of shock and horror on her mother's face. She'd always assumed it had been due to the realization that her daughter was pregnant. She'd never thought about how her mom must have felt afterwards, barred from seeing her daughter, her only child. Her mother continued.
The day they took you from me, if I could go back, I'd fight harder. I'd fight with everything I had to keep you, just as you have done for your son. I understand if you can't come back now. Trust comes with time and the healing of wounds. But just know, your father and I will be waiting for you when you're ready. We're building a better world for Madison. Wherever you are, I hope that you can hear this and that you're safe. That you know that I love you. And
Madison whipped his head around so quickly she was worried he'd twist it right off his shoulders.
I love you too. I can't wait to meet you.
Another pause, and then,
Please, stay safe.
the transmission cut out. Tilda stared at the speakers as if she could see through them to their origin, if she could see her mother's face. A tear trickled down her cheek, and she took a gasping breath. She was more confused than ever. She turned her mother's words over and over again in her head, clanging around in her skull, unable to suss out if it was another trap, the words behind the words. Her mother understood, though. They were members of the same club now, the club where your needs were almost exclusively tied up in the needs of someone else and the need to keep them safe. Her mother understood. It was strange, but she never thought that her mother must view her in this way as well. She never imagined she could feel the level of love she felt for Madison, much less that someone could feel such an overwhelming, powerful emotion of love for her. Tilda wiped at her cheeks and pulled at the reins, pushing Scout forward. "What do we do?" Madison asked. "We keep going," Tilda said roughly, marveling that this was the second time her mother had sent her a message over the universal broadcast system. But your mother will understand, Tilda cut in. Madison waited, restless. Will I ever meet her? I want to meet her. And your dad. You will one day, Mouse. We just have to let things settle down and become safer. Then we'll go back and I'll introduce you to my parents. Deal? After considering the terms, Madison agreed. Deal. Do you think they'll like me? Tilda laughed, kissing the top of his head. They'll love you, baby. And they'll like you too. I hope so, Madison said wistfully. I know so. They lulled into silence, Tilda still on edge that they were being watched. Hearing her mother's voice had sent her heart galloping, electrified her nerves, but she was so tired that it was morphing into a pounding headache and a sort of adrenaline. She couldn't keep still, which aggravated her sore muscles. She could tell she was putting Madison on edge with her nervousness. Every time they passed a speaker mounted on a pole, she stared at it as if it could see her, a being waiting to speak to her, to tell her that they were coming for her. A train whistle blew in the distance and Tilda badly jumped, startling Scout into a brief running start. It was some ways away by the sound of it, north, but Tilda felt as if it were chasing them, the howl of a ghostly specter bearing down on them, refusing to let them forget the machinations of a dying race. As the sun sank lower and lower, the river sneaking along next to them, Tilda spotted a wood-wash sign that read Firefly Vineyards. By the looks of it, there was nothing else for a good 30 minutes by horseback. What's a vineyard? Madison asked, stuttering over the new word. Tilda corrected the pronunciation and then explained. It's a place. It used to be a place where people grew grapes to make wine. What's wine? Madison followed up innocently. Tilda smiled. It's sort of a juice made from fermented grapes. Fermented? Madison parroted, bewildered. It's an aging process that turns the sugar in foods to acid, or, in the case of wine, into alcohol. Alcohol, Madison repeated. It's a chemical that makes people feel funny. Adults used to drink it. As expected, Madison asked. Why? For fun, to feel better, to make things easier, sometimes to forget. It makes things easier? For some people, it makes you less afraid or easier to talk to other people. Madison shook his head. She knew that he had a lot more questions but was refraining from asking them. Tilda was sure the topic would reemerge later. The road up to the vineyard was steep and unpaved. Scout had to labor carefully up it, the dirt and gravel treacherous beneath her hooves. Large, twisted trunks lined the winding path. Weathered stone statues peeked through the trees, bears and hawks and other wildlife, elaborate cursive letters carved into the stone or rendered illegible with time. The light dimmed rapidly as they reached the top, a mansion looming on the hill's peak. All around them, grapevines had grown wildly from their trellis, dead with frost but waiting to bloom again. Did they still grow grapes, she wondered, in the spring, with no one here to eat them? Was there still wine? A quaint stone bridge crossed over a small stream and past a crumbling fountain. Tilda hopped off on the stone path on the other side, helping Madison down and letting Scout drink from the stream and graze on the grass. Hand in hand, she and Madison approached the large oak double doors with ornate wooden handles. They looked at each other before Tilda reached out and grasped the handle, leveraging her weight to pull it open. The wooden panel was thick and heavy. Tilda grunted, ushering Madison inside and slipping between the gap behind him, doing her best to keep it from slamming heavily into place. What would have been a loud bang was muffled to a quieter one. Little victories. Inside was a wide open space, windows making up the walls on all sides with the one behind them, so that they could see the blue mountain range to their north and a lake nestled in the vineyards below them. At one time, Firefly Cellars, as the plaque above the mahogany bar read, must have been beautiful. Now it was gloomy in the dusk, orange and pinks muted through the windows and against the dull wood, and cobwebbed, dusty, empty. A place like this needed to be full. A wooden porch lined the mansion with an outdoor seating area. This must have also been a restaurant as well. A double staircase spiraled around both edges of the open room, leading to a second story. The lights were industrial lanterns and wooden candle holders. The floor was dark-stained wood, but mostly covered with dusty, heavy rugs and shades of red and purple. Colors of wine, Tilda guessed. A quick check behind the bar revealed nothing other than glasses and empty containers, some corkscrews and bottle stoppers. Tilda continued her inspection. 2 bathrooms and a wide-open door descending into the darkness. From the pink light of the quickly fading sunset, Tilda could make out an iron candle holder mounted into the wall. Tilda fished out her lighter from her backpack's side pocket and lit it. It flared to life, only managing to light about half the staircase. Tilda glanced back toward the door, deciding to check on Scout before descending into the creepy basement. She braced herself and yanked the door open. Madison slipped out and grabbed Scout's reins, leading her inside. "Thanks, Mouse." Tilda stroked Scout's neck. Scout looked around, seemingly bored, as Tilda and Madison returned to the staircase. Tilda took the first few stairs, listening intently. Each stair whined loudly in protest. She lit the next candle at the mount halfway down, which illuminated the rest of the way. At the bottom of the stairs was a floor made of stones. A chilly draft made Tilda shudder. She lit the final candle, and its orange glow painted the cellar. Enormous wood-oaked barrels lined both walls, fitted with spouts. The wood was rotting in some places, giving the room an earthy, sweet smell. At the opposite wall was a wine rack, a diamond-patterned wooden apparatus holding what Tilda estimated to be over 100 dusty bottles of wine. Curious, Tilda inspected some of the bottles, looking for vintages. She vaguely remembered that wine was supposed to get better with age, but she doubted that wine this old would still be good, or even safe to drink. Nevertheless, she turned the bottles in her hands, looking at the labels. Off-white with black ink, the mountains and baubles of light. Fireflies. "Is this wine?" Madison asked in a hushed tone. "Yes," Tilda answered, equally soft. "Can we drink it?" he asked eagerly. "No, I don't think so." "Why not? Want to make us feel better?" Tilda smirked. "No. We're dehydrated, and this is really old. It would probably make us feel much worse." Madison frowned, sliding the bottle of wine he'd been eyeing back into place. A loud thump reverberated from above them. They both froze. "Scout?" Madison asked, and Tilda shook her head silently. She didn't know. Another sound. Creaking. Gesturing for Madison to be quiet, she crept toward the stairs, knowing there was no way she could ascend them without making creaking sounds of her own. She weighed their options. They could wait down here, hiding and hoping that it was just an old creaking house, or Scout, and if it wasn't, that whoever was here would not find them. But this option seemed highly optimistic, with Scout resting upstairs. Yes, if this was people making these noises, they'd come looking for them. Tilda spared a glance from Madison, pulling the rifle from where it was slung across her shoulder and adjusting it in her grip. Her hands were shaking. What was she becoming? Were events like these going to become a regular thing? How many tally marks was she going to earn? How many bodies would she leave behind? If her mother knew, what would she think? Could she still love Tilda, the murderer? Would she still welcome her home with open arms? Tilda crept up the stairs, pausing at each one, listening, wincing with each creak, the gun pointed out in front of her much too long. She could hear something from upstairs, something so soft it could be a figment of an anxious imagination, or the stretching and warping of wood and pipes. At the top of the stairs, Tilda took a deep breath that somehow felt like more oxygen than she was used to and made her lightheaded. She blinked back stars, steadying herself. She rounded the corner, her weapon aimed. She looked left, pivoted, squared her shoulders right. Nothing. She edged along the backside of the wall, her heart in her throat. The floor above her creaked and she caught someone whispering. Tilda's finger instinctively tightened on the trigger. "Hello?" Someone called. A male voice from the second story. "Someone there?" Tilda trained her gun on the foot of the stairs. Footsteps padding down the right staircase. Her nostrils flared, her eyes narrowed. Everything else fell away but the foot of the stairs. "Is that a horse?" A female voice, quiet, from above. A man appeared at the foot of the stairs, tall, stained khakis, an orange bubble jacket and blue beanie pulled tight around his head. Big brown boots. His back was to Tilda, surveying the open room. She had the perfect shot. Her face broke out in a cold sweat, her breath quickened. Her finger twitched over the trigger. But she couldn't pull it. She couldn't. Her aim jerked, the butt of the gun jammed painfully against her shoulder as the man turned slowly around, coming to face her and Madison. He shouted at the sight of the gun aimed at him, almost dropping his electric torch. He stumbled back several steps, almost falling, but managed to regain his footing, wide eyes with specks of blue light bright, never leaving Tilda. What is it? What do you see?" A woman shouted frantically from the second story. The man's mouth worked silently, Tilda using her peripheral vision to seek out Scout. His eyes darted to the second story, shaking his head fiercely. He held his hands up slowly, Tilda following his every move with her gun. "We don't mean you any harm," he said, his voice steady, a deep, oddly comforting rumble. But Tilda did not waver. Madison huddled behind her, trembling. "No, stay up there," the man called, his gaze sliding upstairs and then back down to focus on Tilda. Scout wandered into the front room behind him. "Look, we didn't know anyone else was here. We can leave, we can..." He broke off, catching sight of Madison, his brown furrowing. Tilda steadied her aim, preparing to pull the trigger once again. "Wait, are you Tilda? Tilda and Madison?" And that brings us to the end of this penultimate edition of SMNTY Fiction Terminus Part 2. Dun dun dun! Cliffhanger.
Dun, dun, dun.
A lot of cliffhangers. Oh my gosh. Also, as I said, this is very time and place. I can tell where I was when I wrote this. This is when I was discovering Delonico wineries. That, like, the description of the winery at the end, I was like, yeah. I know what you were doing.
I know where you were at.
I remember. It's quite possible there is a Firefly winery. I don't know. Also, the names are definitely references of this group that they encounter at the end, are definitely references to my survivalist neighbors. So take that as you will.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this message that Tilda gets from her mom, this is apparently something I really like to do when I write. I still do this, but kind of the like dramatic, it's broadcast to everybody message, but just this sort of heartfelt, like, please trust me and please come back. This was inspired in part by a story I read that really impacted me when I was a kid, where the child in question just goes off and parties and causes all this trouble and all this stuff. And then at the end, he returns home and he thinks his parents are going to be so angry with him and they're just happy he's alive. So that's definitely what the inspiration was for that section. But is something else going on? I don't know. But we will find out in the last chapter of part 2 coming next month. So please keep a lookout for that. I'm really excited for that one. As always, you can contact us if you have any theories about this, or if you have any suggestions of something else that we could do in the fiction realm. You can email us at stephanieandmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.